Montana Territory, 1877. The wind howled through the Bitterroot Mountains as Nathaniel Pierce rode into the muddy streets of Coldwater Creek, his coat soaked through and his last silver coin tucked deep in his boot. He did not come for trouble. He came for the girl. The saloon doors groaned as he pushed them open, boots heavy with road dust and snowmelt. The room stilled. Men drinking and dealing cards paused to glance at the stranger with the hard eyes and the rifle strapped across his back. Nathaniel ignored them. His gaze locked on the man behind the bar. Paxton Lyle, a rancher turned gambler with a reputation for doing anything but paying what he owed. "I heard you sold her," Nathaniel said, voice low but steady. Paxton's face twitched. "You need to be more specific." Nathaniel walked closer, stopping just short of the bar. "Naomi Lark. You took her as payment from her father. You sold her like a damn mule." There was a pause. The room grew quieter. "She's under contract," Paxton said with a shrug, picking up a glass and wiping it. "Her daddy owed more than $2,000. I gave her a roof, food. Does chores out by Elk Bend. She is not a mule," Nathaniel said again, every word sharp. "Where is she?" Paxton laughed, but it was thin. "You planning to buy her out? You do not even have dust on your boots worth $2,000. Nathaniel reached into his coat and laid a worn, rolled-up deed on the bar. 160 acres of grazing land, south of the Gallatin. All mine. Paxton's eyebrows rose. "That patch of dirt? It is good land, with spring water, enough to raise cattle." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. "It is everything I have." Paxton stared at him like he was a fool, but the man had always been greedy. He took the deed. "You just bought yourself a girl." Nathaniel turned without another word. Naomi Lark was chopping wood when he found her, her hair damp with snow, hands red from the cold. She did not look up at first. Just split another log and stacked it beside the rest. "Naomi," he said. Her axe slowed, then stilled. She turned, eyes widening. "Nathaniel?" Her voice caught. "You, what are you?" "Came to take you home." She stared at him, jaw trembling. "There's no home anymore." "There is," he said. "Mine." She blinked fast, hands tightening around the axe handle. He stepped forward. "You do not owe him a single more thing. You are free." The weight in her expression cracked. She dropped the axe and stepped back, pressing her hand to her mouth. "You how?" Her voice broke. "My father died owing. I gave up everything," Nathaniel said simply. "Everything I had. It was yours anyway. Should have been a long time ago." Naomi stepped toward him slowly, like she still did not believe it. Her fingers grazed his coat sleeve. "You did not have to do that." "I did," he said. "I have not stopped thinking about you since you were 16 and I left for Cheyenne. I should have come sooner." She looked down, eyes wet. "I thought you forgot me," she whispered. "Never," he said. "I came back for you. I always would have." Her chest shook with a breath. Then she threw her arms around him. Nathaniel held her tight. She felt smaller in his arms than he remembered, but stronger too. Her heart beat fast against his chest, and he swore to himself right then he would never let her be taken again. By nightfall, they were packed and riding south by moonlight. Naomi did not speak much, not at first. She leaned into him on the saddle, her hands gripping his coat as if afraid he might disappear. They rode until the stars burned directly overhead and the wind turned colder. Nathaniel led them to an abandoned trapper's cabin he remembered from years back, tucked beneath a pine ridge. It was rough, but the walls held. Inside, Naomi sat beside the fire, her knees drawn up to her chest. Nathaniel laid another log on the flames. "You still cold?" he asked gently. She nodded. He pulled off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. She looked up at him. "I do not know how to be free," she said quietly. "I spent 3 years working off someone else's mistake." "You do not have to know yet," he said. "You just have to be." Naomi's gaze held his. "Why did you really come?" Nathaniel crouched beside her. "Because when I heard what happened, I could not sleep. I kept seeing your face. I kept remembering you picking wildflowers behind your father's house, laughing about how I could not ride straight to save my life." Naomi's lips curved, soft and unsure. I remember, she whispered. I came because you were always the one thing that felt real, he said. And I could not let you disappear. The silence between them deepened and softened. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. I never stopped thinking about you either, she said. Nathaniel took her hand gently, curling his rough fingers around hers. You are safe now, he said. And I am not going anywhere. Naomi drew in a breath, then rested her head on his shoulder. For the first time in a long time, she let herself believe it. The morning came quietly, the kind that crept in slow with a pale light filtering through pine-needled branches. Nathaniel stood outside the cabin, steam curling from the tin cup in his hand. The snow had crusted in the night, stiff patches of white clinging to the earth like stubborn memories. He watched the sky change color above the ridgeline, breath visible in the cold. Behind him, the door creaked. Naomi stepped out, wrapping his coat tighter around herself. Her hair was mussed from sleep, her eyes still heavy. She didn't speak at first, just stood beside him, looking out at the ridge. I dreamed I was back in that house, she said finally. But this time I never left. He didn't look at her. You're not going back. I know. Her voice cracked, not from fear, but something sharper. Sometimes the body forgets what the mind already knows. Nathaniel nodded once. You hungry? She rubbed her arms. I could eat bark if it came with heat. They sat cross-legged near the fire pit where Nathaniel had warmed the last of the beans he'd packed from Bozeman. He passed her a tin plate and they ate in silence, the kind that didn't ask for words. Afterward, Naomi brushed her hands on her skirts and stood. I want to walk some. My legs ache from riding. He watched her step through the frost-bitten grass, careful where the rocks jutted. She didn't ask for company and he didn't offer. Some things needed doing alone. When she returned, her cheeks were flushed and her fingers curled around something small. She held it out to him, a piece of antler, pale and smooth, worn by weather. You used to keep things like this, she said. When we were kids. Said they were lucky. He took it from her, thumb running over the grooves. I still do. They packed up slowly. The trail south would take 3 days if the weather held. Nathaniel checked the horse's hooves, cinched the saddle tight, and tied down the bedrolls. Naomi rolled her sleeves back and filled the canteens at the stream near the treeline. They worked in rhythm without discussion. By midday, the sun had thawed the top layer of snow and the path turned slick in places. Naomi rode ahead, her back straight, her shadow long on the trail behind her. Nathaniel kept a steady pace, eyes sweeping the horizon. The land rolled out wide and open, interrupted only by stubby brush and the occasional hawk circling above. That night, they camped near a bend in the river where cottonwoods leaned like old men trading secrets. Nathaniel dug a fire pit while Naomi gathered dry branches. When the flames caught, she sat with her knees drawn up, staring into the embers. He handed her a blanket and sat beside her, watching the fire lick at the logs. I don't know how to be with someone anymore, she said, voice low. Not real close. You don't have to be anything you're not, he replied. Not for me. She didn't answer right away. I used to think if I could just endure it, it would pass. That time would take the weight off. Did it? No, she said. But I learned how to carry it without falling over. Nathaniel picked up a stick and poked at the coals. I don't expect you to forget what happened. I don't want to forget it, she said. I just don't want it to be the only thing I am. He nodded, slow and deliberate. Then let's build something different. Not to erase it, but to outgrow it. Naomi looked at him, her eyes steady. You really think we can? I wouldn't have come if I didn't. She leaned into him, then not out of fear or desperation, but something quieter. Something choosing. The fire snapped softly as the night deepened and the stars pressed down from above. Nathaniel draped the blanket around both their shoulders. She didn't pull away. You ever think about what kind of life you want? She asked after a while. I used to, he said. Now I just think about what kind of life I'll make if I'm lucky enough to keep it. She rested her head against his collarbone. What would it look like? He thought for a long moment. A place with fences that hold. A roof that doesn't leak. A woman who doesn't have to flinch when someone walks in the room. Naomi was quiet. And you? He asked. A garden, she said. One that grows what I plant. And a kitchen that smells like bread in the winter. You bake. Not yet, she said. But I will. They sat like that until the fire died down and the air grew sharp with cold. When they lay down beneath the stars, it wasn't out of need. It was out of choice. And for the first time in years, Naomi slept without waking. The second day broke under a sky bleached pale by wind, the kind of cold that settled in behind the eyes. Nathaniel led the horse while Naomi walked beside him, her boots crunching over frostbitten grass. They crossed into the lower Gallatin Basin by mid-morning, where the land flattened and the trees thinned into stretches of open range. They didn't speak much. The silence wasn't heavy, just full, like a cup filled to the edge that didn't need stirring. At a shallow creek, they stopped to water the horse and stretch. Naomi crouched near the bank, rubbing her fingers across a flat stone before slipping it into her pocket. Nathaniel watched her with quiet interest, then bent to check the horse's fetlock. The gelding had picked up a pebble. "You always this steady?" she asked without looking at him. He eased the stone loose and tossed it aside. "Steady's the only way you stay alive long out here. You ever get tired of surviving?" Nathaniel straightened, brushing mud from his hands. "Sometimes, but I've never figured a better way to pass the years." She stood, wiping her palms on her skirt. "I used to think surviving meant something was still coming. Something better." He looked at her. "Ain't it?" Naomi studied the current for a long moment. "I think it might be. I just don't trust it yet." They crossed the creek and followed the ridge line south. The wind picked up around mid-afternoon, tugging at Naomi's braid and driving dust into their sleeves. Nathaniel gave her his bandana to tie over her mouth. She didn't protest. By dusk, the horizon burned gold behind the hills, and a lean shape came into view his land. It wasn't much to look at yet. Rough fencing, a squat barn, and a one-room cabin crouched at the edge of a cottonwood cluster, its roof patched with new shingles. Naomi slowed her steps. "You built it yourself?" she asked. "Started it last spring. Had help with the beams, but the rest I laid by hand." She took it in silently. The chimney smoked faintly. He'd left coals buried in the stove before he rode north. He tied the horse to the post and swung his saddlebag down. Inside, the air was dry and faintly pine-scented. The floor was swept, the bed neatly made beneath a patchwork quilt. A table stood near the window, 2 chairs tucked in. He lit the oil lamp and turned to her. "We can add on. There's enough space to build out behind." She stepped further into the room, brushing her fingers along the windowsill. "It's warm," she said softly. He nodded. "I hauled the stove from Virginia City myself. Near broke my back, but it holds heat." Naomi traced the edge of the table. "You planned for someone else." Nathaniel hung his hat on the peg. "I hoped." She turned to face him. "I never had a place that was mine, not even when my father was alive. He always said roofs were for men who stopped moving." He reached for a kettle and filled it from the barrel near the door. "You don't have to stay." "I know," she said, "but I want to." They ate by firelight, jerked elk, dried apples, and pan bread he warmed on the stove. Naomi ate slowly, her gaze moving around the room as if memorizing it. After they washed the tin plates, she pulled her shawl tighter and sat on the edge of the cot. "You ever lose anyone?" she asked. Nathaniel leaned against the doorframe. "My older brother died out near Helena when we were driving stock. He was 21. "What happened?" "Stampede. He got caught under a steer. We buried him in the grass." Naomi looked down at her hands. "When my mother died, I didn't cry. I just cleaned the floor." He didn't answer. She didn't need him to. Later, when the fire had sunk low and the night folded around the cabin like a blanket, she stood from the cot and crossed the room. Nathaniel didn't move. "I'm not asking for promises," she said, voice quiet but sure. "I just want to know what it feels like to be wanted, because not because someone needs a body to carry their dead." Nathaniel met her gaze. "I never thought of you as anything but a person worth building something with." She exhaled, slow and long, and stepped closer. He reached for her hand and she let him take it. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "Then we'll find out together," he replied. And when she leaned her head against his chest, it wasn't out of fear or hope or even relief, it was because she had finally chosen where she wanted to be. The early thaw came late that year. By the second week of March, the dirt around the cabin had turned soft, and the first shoots of green were pressing up through the old frost. Nathaniel was mending the paddock gate when Naomi stepped out onto the porch, sleeves rolled, her arms streaked with flour. "I found a sourdough start in one of your old jars," she said. "Smelled fine enough. Might be something by morning." Nathaniel leaned on the post, wiping his hands with a rag. "Never got bread to rise right. Always came out like saddle leather." She smiled faintly. "Then you haven't seen what I can do yet." He didn't answer, but his gaze lingered. That night, she dragged a stool close to the hearth and opened a worn ledger she'd found behind the stove, a book he'd kept, though the entries were scattered and half-finished. She ran her finger down the list of names scratched in charcoal pencil. Calf births, fence repairs, a small note that simply read, "Lark's girl laughed August." She didn't ask about it. She just left the book open and reached for the sewing basket she'd kept wrapped in linen since they arrived. The needle dipped steady through the fabric, and Nathaniel, sitting nearby with his boots off, watched the fire bend low. "You ever think about what you'd be if you weren't here?" she asked after a while. He shifted, stretching a hand toward the kettle. "I used to say I'd run a smithy. I like the heat, the rhythm of hammering." "You still could." He shook his head. "Hands don't have the patience anymore. Too many winters caught in snow." She laid the cloth in her lap. "I always wanted to draw people. Faces mostly. Never had paper that wasn't needed for lists or debts." Nathaniel looked over, one brow lifting. "You draw." "Haven't in years. But I still see things like I might." "Like what?" She met his eyes. "The way your mouth pulls to the right when you're trying not to laugh. Or how your left thumb presses the side of your cup whenever it's too quiet." Nathaniel blinked once. "That's so?" She gave a slow nod. "It's how I kept sane, noticing things no one else did." He didn't speak for a moment, then reached toward the shelf above the stove. From behind a tin of tea, he pulled a folded sheet of thick paper, yellowed but clean. "Been saving this," he said. "Didn't know what for." She took it with both hands, her face unreadable. She didn't thank him. She just held the paper like something sacred and slipped it inside the ledger. The next day, Naomi walked the north fence, her shawl trailing behind her, curls shaking loose from her braid. She paused often, crouching near sprigs of wild onion or lifting a hand to the sky to gauge the sun's climb. When she returned near dusk, her cheeks were wind-burnt and her boots were caked in mud. "I marked 3 places where the fence is sagging," she said. 2 near the creek, 1 behind the barn." Nathaniel nodded. "I can fix those tomorrow." "We can," she said. They worked side by side the following morning, her hands steady on the rail as he hammered in the new posts. She didn't flinch at the noise or the weight. She didn't ask for rest. When he passed her the last nail, their fingers brushed, and she didn't pull away. That evening, she brought out the paper again. She'd made a charcoal pencil from the hearth ash and a piece of softwood. She sat at the table, head bowed, sketching with delicate, sure strokes. Nathaniel sat across from her, watching the way her wrist moved, how her eyes narrowed each time she leaned closer. She didn't show him the drawing. She folded it carefully and slipped it between the pages of the ledger. When he reached for her hand that night, she let him take it without question. "You ever think we'll be more than what we were before?" she asked. He ran his thumb over her knuckles. "I already do." She turned toward him, eyes dark and tired, but searching. "You mean that?" Nathaniel nodded once. "You're not a debt. You're not a burden. You're the reason I came back." She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "Then I'll stay. Not because I owe you, but because I want to see what we turn into." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently to hers. "We'll build it slow. We've got time." Outside, the wind had settled and the last snowmelt trickled from the eaves. Inside, by the low flicker of lamplight, Naomi rested her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that until the fire burned down to ash. April settled across the Gallatin Valley like a soft breath, coaxing green from brittle earth and waking the cottonwoods with slow, rustling buds. The cabin windows stayed open most days now, letting in the scent of turned soil and the low hum of bees moving through the brush. Naomi stood in the garden bed behind the house, sleeves rolled high, dirt smudging the curve of her forearms. She hummed under her breath. Not a tune she remembered, just something that had grown in her since the thaw. Nathaniel was splitting rails near the barn, his shirt damp at the collar, with chips scattered around his boots. He paused when she straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. "There's something wrong with the ground here. Won't hold the seeds," she called. He set down the hatchet and walked over, crouching beside her. "This spot's too shallow," he said. "Roots'll dry out before summer." Her brow furrowed. "I thought I turned the soil deep enough." "You did. But there's old gravel underneath. Storm years back laid it down like a blanket." Naomi exhaled, brushing her hair back with her wrist. "I'll shift the rows west, near where the lilacs started coming up." He nodded. "That ground drains better." She didn't move right away. "I want it to work. I want it to grow." "It will," he said. "Might take longer than you thought, but it'll come." That night, Naomi sat on the porch steps with her knees drawn up, watching the last light fade past the fence line. Nathaniel joined her quietly, handing her a mug of water. She drank half, then passed it back. "I got a letter from the county clerk," he said. "They recorded the deed transfer. Land's officially ours now." She turned her head to him, eyes catching the pale blue of twilight. "What name did you give them?" "Pierce. It's still my land." She was quiet a long while. "Would you mind if it was ours in name too?" He looked at her, slow and steady. "You asking me to marry you, Naomi Lark?" Her mouth curved, not quite a smile. "I'm saying I don't need a church or a ring. Just want to know we're building the same life." Nathaniel set the mug down and took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "We are," he said. "We've been building it since the day we left Coldwater." "No fence ever felt this solid," she murmured. They married under the cottonwoods 3 days later, with the creek running high and a red-tailed hawk circling above. No preacher came. Nathaniel carved a line into the old cedar post near the porch, and she traced it with her fingertip, sealing the vow. He gave her his mother's shawl, folded and stored in a cedar box for years. She wrapped it around her shoulders and kissed him once, slow and sure. That summer, the garden bloomed in crooked rose beans twisting up twine, squash curling low to the dirt, and a patch of corn that rose taller than Naomi by August. She baked bread that didn't burn, and Nathaniel brought back fresh-cut pine to build a second room off the back of the cabin. They filled it with shelves, tools, and the smell of rain-soaked wood. When the harvest came, they pressed apples into cider, dried the beans, and packed the root cellar full. Naomi drew in the evenings, sketching faces from memory and from life, filling the ledger with charcoal portraits. Nathaniel read by lamplight, one hand always resting on her knee or shoulder, as if making sure she was still there. One night, with frost thickening the window panes and the first snow drifting down, Naomi stirred the fire and turned to him. "I want to teach," she said. "Not just reading. I mean drawing. For girls like I was, who never had paper that wasn't for debts." Nathaniel met her eyes across the room. "Then we'll make you a place to do it." They cleared the old tool shed by spring and fitted it with benches, a wide table, and a small stove. Naomi taught her first lesson that June 3 girls from neighboring farms, too shy to speak at first until she showed them how to draw the shape of a hand. Years passed, slow and kind. The land grew thick with wheat and children's laughter. Naomi's drawings lined the walls of the cabin, and Nathaniel's hands, though stiff with age, still held her as steady as they had the first time he'd said her name outside the trapper's cabin. They never spoke of the years before, of debts or chains or the long walk toward trust. Not because they forgot, but because those things had settled into the earth beneath their home, broken down and buried beneath the roots of what they built. When they stood together in the doorway watching the next harvest rise, Naomi leaned into his side and whispered, "I never thought peace would look like this." Nathaniel kissed her temple, his voice low. "You gave it shape." And in the stillness that followed, they didn't speak again. They didn't need to. Everything they were was already planted, already growing, already blooming in the wide, open hush of the life they chose together.